Hello everyone. Today I'm going to tie a very special fly for me. It's a fly that has caught a big share of my big trouts, and it's called Klinkhåmer Special. So several years ago I found an amazing article on the internet about real thoughts behind this fly, and it was written by Hans Van Klinken himself, so I knew that every word in it was pure gold. I mean, the author who made this fly wrote the article, it has to be perfect. Now, big thanks to the author, Hans Van Klinken, and with his permission I will give you these thoughts here on the video. First, I will tell you a short history about this fly, and then I will proceed with tying with all the explanations that are very important for the fly. So Mr. Hans himself in this article gave credits to few other guys who created deep hanging parachute flies at the same time or even before him. So these guys are Thomas Olsen, Roy Richardson and Mike Monroe, with the last one even publishing an article about his parachute fly called Paratilt in 1979. When it comes to name, originally Klinkhåmer was called LT Cadiz. Now, as many fishermen's stories, this one includes few drinks, and two of Hans's friends. One of them is Hans de Groot, and the other one is Ton Lindhout. Well, I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing these names correctly. These guys are responsible for the Klinkhåmer's name as we know it today. It all started in Norway on Glomma River. Hans was using Rackenhanen fly, and now I'll show you how that fly is more or less looking like. Just give me a second, please. I tried to reproduce the fly. It doesn't look really like that, but it's poly yarn and it's caddis imitation. So on that river he was using the Rackenhanen fly, and it did good, but he was not entirely happy with it. Sometimes fly wouldn't land properly, or he used too much floatant, and even though the fish were rising at it, the hook up rate was very poor, so like 3 out of 10 fish would hook up. So to solve the problem, Hans added hackle around the wing. So something like this. Lift up the wing and tie the hackle around it. So now this was the how he created his first parachute fly. After this first initial parachute fly, the author noticed that flies that floated in the film, so a little bit lower than usually, produced more fish than high-riding flies. Another reason he stayed with parachutes was that grayling. It's a fish that's more or less built for the bottom feeding. So he noticed that regular flies with shoulder hackle and tails tend to bounce off grayling's mouth. So parachute flies and deep hanging flies, they had much higher hookup rate. And that was like one of the main reasons he switched to those parachutes. Now let's talk about like why fishing in the surface. So bye with this fly. Let's go back to the Klinkhåmer. It's all about Klinkhåmer. So why fishing parachute? So first, it's a presentation. However you cast this fly, it will land perfectly with body submerged under the water into the water film. So firstly, it's like presentation, and it floats really well even in high and rough water. Now the idea of the parachute is to present fly lower in the surface film compared to those high riding flies, which gives it much better silhouette. So imagine the fly that's under the water, the fish can see just the body, not too many hackles and stuff, so the silhouette is much better. Now I'd like to add that Klinkhåmer perfectly imitates transition phases of insects from emergers to flying insects. This is the most vulnerable phase for insects, so fish, they know that, and they will rise even from greater depths to take such flies. This makes Klinkhåmer one of the most perfect search patterns in my opinion. Now, in imitating insects, there are a few key points: size, shape, well, silhouette, color, and mobility. These key points, they determine how good our fly is or not. Of course, there are some other, but we can't know everything. But we can look for it, and that's actually the beauty of everything. here. Now, when it comes to tying, let's start tying it and see some tying problems and misunderstandings. First, we are going to talk about the hook. Okay, now originally Hans developed hooks for Klinkhåmer for two main companies. First it was Partridge and then it was Daiichi, and I found these by Hanak. I hope that this is also his design, not sure, haven't asked, but it will suit. So there is a flat surface around here, and here the hook starts to bend. Now, very important thing is that hook has fine wire, so it will help buoyancy of our fly. It has very wide gap, which will help with hookup rate, and it's curved, which helps to get a perfect silhouette of the fly, which is immersed body in the water. Now, you can use flat, straight hook, but it's not a Klinkhåmer then, so keep it bent like this. Now, when it comes to thread, the author would use two threads. The thicker one, 8/0 or 6/0, he would use it to cover the body, tie off the thorax and everything else. And he would use spider web originally, but I'm using Nano Silk by Semperfli. I don't have spider web, so sorry about that. So he would use a very thin one to tie off the parachute post or the hackle here. So he's using it for that. So he changes, at a certain point he changes the thread. I will tell you about it. Now I'll start with the thread first. So I'm going to use just one thread here. And the reason behind that is like this fly is quite small, so I don't need to change the thread. And I like this very thin thread. Now I'll bend this hook a little bit so it will be much easier for me to create the body later. Okay, with this slippery thread, be careful how you tie it, so make a really nice foundation first and then proceed to everything else. So I mentioned before this first bend here. This is the place where I want my parachute post to start. Now wing. Firstly, it makes fly more visible, because sometimes fish would just come under the fly and suck it without any water disturbance, so fly just would simply disappear from the surface. So as soon as you see the fly disappears, just set the hook. One of the main features of the wing is that it has to be lighter than water. So I'm using Parapost wing in hot pink here. You can use white or any color that you like. It has to be lighter than water, and it's better to have curved fibers. Now I'll show you that. Curved fibers than straight ones. The reason behind this is that curved fibers will actually hold air much better, so buoyancy will be improved. Then it mustn't be slippery, because slippery material will hold hackle not as good as the non-slippery material. So we improve quality of our fly with non-slippery material, which will hold hackle better. Now the amount of yarn is personal matter, so you choose it according to the fly size and how rough the water where you want to fish is. So for example, bigger the fly, more yarn, smaller the fly, less yarn. Also, rougher the water, more yarn, less rough the water, less yarn. So it's like very easy. So let me show you how he ties in the yarn. Now I will show you one thing that I like to use with these yarns, because if you cut these yarns and you brush them out, they're going to fight with you, they're going to flare all around. So I like to use this knot over here to keep it in control here. So I'll just cut a piece of yarn, because with too long yarn it's a bit more difficult to handle. Now I'm going to keep this on the top of the hook shank, and with a pinch and loop. So place your thread between fingers, pinch it on the top of the hook with few more wraps, secure it on the top, and then, very important, cut it by an angle. By cutting it like this, you will provide the perfect taper for the body, which we are going to cover with the thread. So perfect underbody makes it easier to create perfect body. So with touching turns, as you can see, I'm creating a tapered body here. Okay, so I'm covering all those fibers. Now I'll go back a little bit. I want to cover this pink color as well. So this is very thin thread, so I can allow myself to do it with more wraps than I usually would do. So you can see that I already covered this pink thing. Now I'll continue with my taper down there. It's also important that you have slim body because it will penetrate the water film more easily, and make it longer because it will stay deeper in the surface film, which is more attractive to the fish. So don't be afraid to go a little bit more into the bend of the hook. Okay, now when it comes to dubbing, let me tell you a few things about dubbing. So body material or dubbing, originally Hans uses two for his flies. For normal and big flies he would use fly right poly dubbing, and for smaller ones he would use Wapsi superfine waterproof dry fly dubbing. Personally, because that was what I got when I first tied my Klinkhammers, I used well, hare's fur at first, but it was not as good for obvious reasons. But when I got Ice UV tan, I fall in love with this. It's not perfect material, it's not as easy to dub as those materials that Hans is using, but this is what I was using at first, and it produced me so many fish that it's incredible. So you can try whatever you like, but it has to be also lighter than water. And a very important thing is to use very small amount of dubbing, less than you would think you need. So let me show you how to do it. So look at this. This is more or less what I'm having for this hook size 16. So what I would do is the next thing. Take, you can see it like a couple of strands, like 2 or 3, even 1, spin them around the thread, and you will create very thin noodle here. So it's better to go in segments, because if you go step by step, you're going to make it more even and more perfect. So because my phone is too close, I have to do it like that. So go in touching turns. Okay, now I'm not so satisfied here because I want to make it even more tight. This material is not perfect, as I said, because it's fighting you, but it's very good when it comes to catching fish and durability. So as you can see, I covered a little bit. Now, few more fibers, again, very few. See, very nice and tight dubbing noodle. I'll add some more and just do it repeatedly until you cover all the way until the parachute post. So I'm getting closer. I need maybe one more pinch, and that's more or less all the dubbing I prepared for this fly. As you can see, nothing left in my hands. Okay, I'm using also tight wraps with my thread because it's very strong to keep this dubbing in place. What I like to do, I would cut those stray fibers, because the thinner the body, it penetrates more easily. If you have any stray fibers, they will catch water surface, so they may make it a little bit more difficult for the body to sink. So just make it as slim and thin and tight as you can. Now, when you've finished your body, there is one thing you can do to make your life easier. It's make a couple of turns with your thread around your parachute post. That's all in order to keep it in position, to make it easier for you later to wind on the hackle. So don't go too much up the post, just a couple of reps to keep it in position and to keep it from spinning and wiggling under your fingers when you mount the hackle. Now when it comes to hackle, that's a very important thing, and the author himself says that the fly A parachute fly, and I quote now, so the parachute fly floats in the surface mainly because of the perfectly balanced and well-tied horizontal hackle. That's end of the quote. Now, stiff fibers as well as long fibers, those barbules, they're actually supporting your fly on the surface. They are creating surface tension and they are keeping your fly afloating. When it comes to bigger Klinkhammers, then it's also very important to have very good and let's say well-tied and rich parachute post, because the parachute post on bigger flies is going to keep your fly afloat. Keep that in mind, please. Now, some folks would use very soft and bad hackle, and because they think it's going to be good for the fly, but actually it's not, for the previous reasons. And the other reasons for that are that when you're casting your fly, those soft barbules are going to deform. Also, when fish is chewing your fly, it's gonna deform, and after that you can't fish it because it won't be as buoyant as it was. That's why stiffer fibers are gonna keep the shape, and they're going to fish as well as the moment you casted them the first time in the water. Now, when it comes to number of turns around the parachute post, you should keep it at least 4 and 5 for the smaller flies. For the bigger ones, keep that number up. Also for the more rough water, keep that number up. That's very important. Now, the author would say that you should do this feelingly. So as long as those fibers are listening to you, they're aligning horizontally, you should keep doing it. As long as they start fighting you, stop doing it, because it's too much. Now, when it comes to thorax, just let me tie in the first hackle. Remove the webby part and like this. So remove the webby part. Now clear the stem a little bit, or a little bit more as I did it just now. Always tie in the stem with the shiny side facing you. Okay, so I'm going to position this stem upwards, but again, I'm going to remind you, don't go too much up the parachute post. So just a couple of turns, make it rigid at the base so it won't slip later. And this stem in front of it is also very important. Now the next step is thorax, as we said. So you can use peacock because it's what's in the original recipe, but bear in mind that, like, depending on the size of your fly should depend the size of the peacock herl. So you have them in different sizes. I found this eye to have those very thin ones, and I'm going to use them. Any number between 1 and 3 is okay. Because these are very thin, I'm gonna use 3, and I'm gonna tie them with tip exceeding, as you can see, because I'm gonna break off those tips. So go with a thread behind parachute post. Now, very important one thing, the otter would go with a thread here, then he would lead peacock curls up to the eye, tie them off there, cut the thread and stop there. Then he would rotate the fly and change the thread. I'm not going to do that because I'm already using the thin thread. It's not a spider web, but it's doing its job well. So wind those curls around the thread in order to reinforce it. The author does it with thin varnish. I will show you that later. And then with 2 very open wraps, go to the eye of the hook and then go back. So going, touching, turns backwards. Now, reason why we left some space behind is because we are going to do 2 turns behind the parachute post, and I like to finish it here. And let's go, tie it off at the parachute base, as you can see. So I'll tie off the peacock at the parachute base. Now 1 or 2 more wraps just to be sure it's there. Now, as I said already, this is the spot where the author would change the thread. He would use spider web because it's very thin and it's very strong, so it will protect hackle wraps from trout's teeth, which is very important. Now, let me take 1 or 2 more wraps here. Yeah, okay. Now, one more reason, let me tell you about one mistake I was doing before. So first I would make this thread wraps too much up the parachute post, which would actually close this poly yarn, and it would make it less buoyant. Then I was using super glue, which will actually prevent floatant from entering all the pores around the parachute post, which is again decreasing my buoyancy of the fly. So what author does is he would apply thin varnish after he whip finishes the fly. He would apply it here, and it would soak into the peacock to protect it, and it would soak up the parachute post a little bit to protect the hackle wraps. So let me show you how to wrap those hackle wraps first. Break the stem, that's a very important step. And as you can see, I'm having bare stem right here because the first one, maybe 1.5 wrap is going to be almost for nothing. So it's going to lead my feather upwards, as you can see. So my first wrap should start so like this, and then the next one should go below it, and each turn should go below the previous one. Keep those wraps horizontal. Keep them horizontal. As you can see, this one is fighting me a little bit, but it's okay. So keep them. Now, I sometimes go below just to lift those straight fibers. I go below these hackle wraps. And let me see, is it fighting me? It's on the edge there. So I'll catch it with 2 wraps with my thread and pull tightly so it won't come out. Cut your feather. Cut your feather there. Now I like to help it a little bit with my fingers like this for the next step. Use your whip finish tool to pull up all those straight barbels, and with like 3 to 4 turns finish off your fly. And now cut off the thread. Now, as you can see, the hackle is horizontal. It's not going below the shank of the hook, which is very important for the perfect position of our fly in the water. If you have any straight fibers, just cut them off. Okay? Now, cut parachute post longer than you actually think you need it. On the water you can make it shorter. When it comes to applying floatant on this fly, apply the floatant on the parachute post, on the tips of the hackles if you must, and never ever on the body. That's very important, so the body could... Now, let me tell you just a few things how to fish this fly or other dry fly. You should always make a good balance between size of the fly and size of your tippet, meaning that if you have large fly, you should use larger diameter of your tippet, because the large fly, they sometimes tend to spin your tippet and make you some problems. Also, longer the tippet, the more wiggles will create in the presentation, so the longer drag-free drift you will have. That's very good thing to know. So my tippet is usually somewhere between 120 and almost 2 meters in length. And I rarely go over 0.14 in diameter. So guys, this was Klinkhåmer fly. It was one of my favorite flies and still is, of course. And this is the variation of it, meaning the body only, that I love so much. I caught countless fish on it, and it brought me so much joy. So I would like you to, so I would strongly suggest that you try this one and the original one, of course. How we should protect this fly: you should use thin varnish, and you should do the next thing. Let me just take some varnish. So take a small drop of varnish and place it between peacock and hackle so it would soak in like this. Okay? So this varnish would go into the peacock and into the hackle, and it will protect it when it gets dry. Now I'd like to say big thanks to Mr. Hans Van Klinken for letting me do this video and share some of his thoughts about this amazing fly. So thank you very much, Mr. Hans, and thank you guys for watching this, and see you next week.